They lied in court, but I have proof. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that made every shuffle, every cough, and every breath feel deafening. Maya sat in the defendant's chair, her palms clammy and heart racing. She was fighting for her life, or at least that's how it felt. The stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. Her ex-husband, Daniel, a man once charming but now venomous, sat across from her, wearing the smirk of someone who thought they'd already won. The judge, an older man with a stern face and piercing eyes, adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Kapoor," he said, addressing her lawyer. "You may proceed." Maya's attorney, Lena, rose confidently. "Your Honor, the claims made by the opposing counsel are not only baseless but outright fabricated. We intend to prove that the evidence presented by Mr. Dalton," she glanced sharply at Daniel's lawyer, "has been manipulated." Maya's pulse quickened. This was her chance to show the truth. For weeks, Daniel had painted her as an unfit mother, a negligent and reckless woman. He claimed she had endangered their daughter, Lily, with fabricated stories and false witnesses. But Maya had something they didn't know. Evidence that could expose their lies and turn the tide in her favor. The first witness was called to the stand, a former neighbor who claimed to have seen Maya neglecting Lily. As the man swore to tell the truth, Maya's jaw clenched. He was lying. She knew it. This man, who barely spoke to her in the years they lived next door, was now Daniel's pawn. "She would leave the child crying for hours," the neighbor said, avoiding Maya's gaze. "Sometimes, I wondered if the baby was even being fed properly." Maya's fists tightened under the table. She remembered this man as someone who once asked her to lower her music at a perfectly reasonable hour, someone who seemed to enjoy finding faults. Now he was describing her as a monster. Lena leaned forward. "Mr. Bennett, how many times did you actually visit Ms. Kapoor's home?" The man hesitated. I didn't, but I could hear." "So, you never saw the inside of her home? Never saw how she interacted with her child?" Elena's tone was sharp, slicing through his flimsy testimony. "No," he admitted, looking uncomfortable. Maya felt a small surge of hope. Elena was good, but the battle was far from over. The second witness was Daniel's new girlfriend, Vanessa, a woman who had entered Maya's life with a smile and a hidden dagger. Vanessa testified with a polished tone, claiming she had seen Maya lash out at Lily during a public outing. "She grabbed her arm so hard the child cried," Vanessa said, her expression one of feigned concern. "Lies. All lies." Maya remembered that day vividly. Lily had thrown a tantrum at the park, and Maya had gently held her arm to guide her back to the car. There was no screaming, no harm, just a tired mother trying to calm her toddler. As Vanessa continued her testimony, Maya's mind raced. She thought of the evidence she had, the proof that could dismantle all of this. But timing was everything. She couldn't show her cards too soon. When the court adjourned for lunch, Maya and Elena huddled in a quiet corner. "They're relentless," Maya said, her voice shaking. Elena nodded. "But they're also sloppy. Their stories don't align perfectly, and that's where we'll catch them." Maya hesitated before pulling out her phone. "I have something," she whispered. Elena's eyebrows rose. "What is it?" Maya opened a folder of saved files, photos, videos, and messages. Proof that Vanessa and Daniel planned all of this. They were careless, and I recorded them without them knowing. Elena's eyes widened. "Maya, this could change everything. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I wanted to be sure it was enough," Maya said. "I didn't want to risk showing it unless I had to." Elena studied the files, her expression shifting from surprise to determination. This is gold. We'll introduce it at the right moment. For now, we let them dig their own grave." As the second half of the trial resumed, Daniel took the stand. He was smooth, calculated, and dripping with false sincerity. He spoke about his concerns for Lily's safety, his fears about Maya's ability to care for her. "She's unstable," he said, glancing at the jury. "I've tried to co-parent, but her behavior makes it impossible." Maya bit her lip, fighting the urge to scream. He was painting himself as the hero, the savior, but she knew the truth. When it was Elena's turn to cross-examine, she pounced. "Mr. Dalton, have you ever misrepresented facts to benefit yourself?" "Of course not," Daniel replied smoothly. Elena smiled, a predator sensing weakness. "And yet we have evidence suggesting otherwise." Daniel's confident demeanor faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elena turned to the judge. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to present new evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Dalton's claims." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Maya held her breath as Elena connected the courtroom screen to Maya's phone. The first video played, a recording of Daniel and Vanessa in what appeared to be a heated discussion. "We just need to stick to the story," Daniel was saying. "Maya's already on edge. One more push, and she'll break." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Daniel's face turned pale. "And what if she doesn't?" Vanessa's voice asked. "Then we make sure she does," Daniel replied coldly. Elena paused the video. "Mr. Dalton, care to explain?" Daniel stammered. That's taken out of context." "Oh, there's more," Elena said, clicking to the next clip. The footage showed Vanessa rehearsing her testimony, her words mirroring what she had said in court earlier that day. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her as the jury's expressions shifted. The tide was turning, but this was just the beginning. There was more to uncover, more lies to expose, and Maya wasn't going to stop until the truth set her free. The courtroom had descended into chaos. The whispers among the jury, the shifting postures of the spectators, and the stunned silence of Daniel all spoke to one thing. The damning evidence Maya and Elena had presented was only the beginning. The judge banged his gavel 3 times, calling for order. "Let me remind everyone," the judge said, his voice firm. "This is a court of law, not a spectacle. Ms. Kapoor's counsel, do you have more evidence to present at this time?" Elena stood, composed but electric with purpose. "Not at this moment, Your Honor. However, the recordings presented today will be corroborated by additional testimony and documentation. We request the opportunity to introduce these as the trial proceeds." The judge nodded. "Very well. Mr. Dalton, do you wish to respond to these accusations before we adjourn for the day?" Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Grayson, stood. His demeanor was cool, but Maya could see the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, this so-called evidence is incomplete and lacks proper context. We will challenge its admissibility and present a full rebuttal tomorrow." "Noted," the judge said, his tone neutral. "Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow." He struck his gavel once more, and the tension in the room began to dissipate, though it didn't disappear entirely. Maya let out a shaky breath, her fingers trembling as she gathered her belongings. Elena leaned in, her voice low and reassuring. "You did great today. That evidence hit harder than I expected." "I'm scared," Maya admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if they find a way to twist it? What if the jury doesn't believe me?" Elena placed a hand on her shoulder. "They're on the defensive now, Maya. That's where we want them. But we need to stay focused. Do you have anything else? Messages, emails, anything that strengthens our case?" Maya hesitated. "There's one more thing," she said, pulling out a printed email thread from her bag. "It's from last year. Daniel sent me this during our custody negotiations. He threatened to ruin me if I didn't give him full custody." Elena's eyes scanned the papers, her expression hardening with every line. "This is gold. It shows premeditation and intent. We'll use it, but not yet. Timing is everything." As they walked out of the courthouse, Maya noticed Daniel and Vanessa standing near the exit. Vanessa's face was a mask of barely concealed fury, while Daniel appeared pale and rattled. He caught Maya's eye, and for a brief moment, his mask slipped. She saw the fear behind his bravado, the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. But fear turned quickly to anger. He stormed toward her, Vanessa trailing behind him. "You think you've won something?" he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "This isn't over, Maya. You're going to regret this." Elena stepped between them. "Back off, Daniel. This isn't the place for your intimidation tactics." He glared at her, then at Maya, before turning and walking away. Vanessa shot Maya a glare that could cut glass before following him. "That man," Elena said, shaking her head, "is digging his own grave." That evening, Maya sat in her dimly lit living room, the weight of the day pressing down on her like a boulder. Lily was asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around her. Maya envied her innocence. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she hesitated before picking it up. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think those recordings will save you? You're playing a dangerous game, Maya. Stop now or you'll regret it." Her stomach dropped. She stared at the message, her mind racing. Who had sent this? Daniel? Vanessa? One of their allies? She quickly forwarded the message to Elena, adding a note, "I just got this. What do we do?" Within seconds, Elena called. "Maya, this is a good thing." "A good thing," Maya repeated, incredulous. "Yes, it's a veiled threat, and it shows they're scared. We can bring this up in court as an example of their attempts to intimidate you. But for now, block the number and don't respond. We'll deal with it strategically." Maya nodded, though her hands still trembled. She blocked the number and set her phone down, staring at it like it might explode. The next morning, Maya walked into the courtroom with a renewed sense of determination. Elena had spent the night preparing for the day's proceedings, and the confidence in her stride was contagious. As the trial resumed, Daniel's lawyer called Vanessa back to the stand. Her polished demeanor was back, and she answered questions with an air of practiced sincerity. "Ms. Clark," Mr. Grayson began, "can you describe Maya Kapoor's behavior during the custody exchange at the park?" Vanessa nodded. She was agitated and aggressive. When Lily didn't want to go with her, Maya grabbed her arm and started yelling. Elena stood to object. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay and lacks corroborative evidence." "Sustained," the judge said. Elena smiled slightly, then rose for her cross-examination. "Ms. Clark, you claim you witnessed this incident at the park. Can you tell the court the exact date and time it occurred?" Vanessa hesitated. "It was sometime in May around noon." Elena picked up a file from the table. "Interesting, because according to this daycare attendance sheet, Lily was signed in and present at daycare every weekday in May until 3 p.m. So, are you suggesting this incident happened at night, when the park was closed?" Vanessa faltered. I must have gotten the date wrong." Elena didn't let up. Or perhaps it didn't happen at all. The courtroom buzzed again, and Vanessa's facade began to crumble. By the end of the day, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. Elena had poked holes in every story Daniel and his witnesses had presented. But the biggest blow came when Elena introduced the threatening text Maya had received. "Your Honor," Elena said, handing the phone records to the judge. "This message was sent to my client late last night. The number is registered to Vanessa Clark." Vanessa's eyes widened in shock, and Daniel's face turned a deep shade of red. The judge looked stern. "Ms. Clark, do you have an explanation for this?" Vanessa stammered, but no coherent words came out. Maya's heart swelled. For the first time in months, she felt the tide truly turning in her favor. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric the next morning. Whispers buzzed among the spectators, and even the jurors exchanged uneasy glances. The introduction of the threatening text had shaken everyone, but for Maya, it was only the beginning. She had resolved to see this through no matter what it took. Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Grayson, was visibly tense as he called his next witness. Anthony Parks, a private investigator hired by Daniel. Anthony was a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and a smug expression that hinted at confidence. Perhaps too much of it. "Mr. Parks," Grayson began, "you were hired by my client to observe Ms. Kapoor's interactions with her daughter, correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Anthony replied, his voice calm and assured. "And in your professional opinion, did you witness behavior that would indicate Ms. Kapoor is unfit as a mother?" Anthony nodded, leaning forward slightly as if to emphasize his point. "Yes, on multiple occasions, I observed her yelling at the child and neglecting her in public spaces. She seemed overwhelmed and inattentive." Maya clenched her fists under the table, her heart pounding. She had no idea who this man was or how he could claim to know anything about her. Lena, however, remained unfazed. "Thank you, Mr. Parks," Grayson said. "No further questions." Lena stood, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the witness stand. "Mr. Parks," she began, her tone measured, "how many cases have you worked as a private investigator?" Anthony smirked. "Over 200. "Impressive," Lena said, nodding. "And in these cases, how often do you rely on photographs or video evidence to support your observations?" "Almost always," Anthony replied. "Documentation is key." "Excellent," Lena said, turning to face the courtroom. "So, if you observed Ms. Kapoor yelling at her child or neglecting her, surely you must have photographic or video evidence to support these claims?" Anthony hesitated, his confidence wavering slightly. "I was unable to capture clear footage in this case." Lena raised an eyebrow. "You were unable to capture clear footage? Or you didn't have any footage at all?" Anthony shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I didn't have any footage." The courtroom buzzed again, and Lena let the moment hang in the air before continuing. "So, Mr. Parks, we're expected to take your word as fact, despite you having no evidence to back your claims?" Grayson stood. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is badgering the witness." "Sustained," the judge said, but Lena had already made her point. "Thank you, Mr. Parks," Lena said, returning to her seat. As the day wore on, the defense began to unravel further. Each witness Daniel called seemed less credible than the last, their stories riddled with inconsistencies that Lena expertly dismantled. Maya watched in awe as her lawyer methodically tore apart their case, piece by piece. But the real turning point came when Lena presented a surprise witness. Dr. Hannah Collins, a child psychologist who had conducted an evaluation of Lily as part of the custody proceedings. Dr. Collins was a composed woman in her late 40s, with a calm demeanor that immediately commanded respect. After being sworn in, she began to explain her findings. "Dr. Collins," Lena began, "you conducted an evaluation of Lily Kapoor at the court's request. Can you summarize your findings for the jury?" "Yes," Dr. Collins replied. "Lily is a bright and emotionally resilient child. However, during our sessions, she expressed significant anxiety about being separated from her mother. She described feeling scared and confused during exchanges with her father and his fiancée." Lena nodded. "And did Lily's behavior suggest any signs of neglect or abuse while in her mother's care?" "Absolutely not," Dr. Collins said firmly. "In fact, Lily appeared to have a strong, loving bond with her mother. She described her home environment as safe and happy." Grayson stood for cross-examination, but his attempts to discredit Dr. Collins were weak at best. The psychologist remained calm, her answers concise and unwavering. By the time she stepped down, the jury seemed visibly moved. During the lunch break, Maya and Lena sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria. Maya was exhausted but felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. "I can't believe how well it's going," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm scared it's too good to be true. Elena smiled, her confidence radiating. They're crumbling, Maya. Daniel and his team are grasping at straws and it's showing. But we can't get complacent. There's still more work to do. As they spoke, Maya's phone buzzed again. She hesitated before looking at the screen, her stomach sinking when she saw another message from an unknown number. You think you're safe because of today? You're not. Stop now, or Lily will suffer the consequences. Maya's hands shook as she showed the message to Elena. Her lawyer's face darkened. This is escalating, Elena said, her tone grim. We need to report this to the judge immediately. When court resumed, Elena addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, we have received another threatening message targeting my client and her daughter. This level of intimidation is not only unacceptable but also illegal. We request additional security measures for Ms. Kapoor and her child. The judge's expression hardened. Ms. Kapoor, do you believe you are in immediate danger? Yes, Your Honor, Maya replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The judge nodded. Very well. I will authorize additional security and have this matter investigated. Let me make it clear to everyone in this courtroom. Any further attempts to intimidate or threaten parties involved in this case will result in immediate legal action. Maya felt a small wave of relief, but the tension in the room was palpable. Daniel looked furious, while Vanessa avoided eye contact altogether. The day ended with the introduction of a new piece of evidence. An email thread between Daniel and a friend of his, discussing strategies to discredit Maya in court. The emails were laced with derogatory comments about her character and detailed plans to manipulate witnesses. Elena presented the emails with the same precision as always. Your Honor, this correspondence not only shows Mr. Dalton's intent to deceive the court, but also his willingness to use unethical means to win custody. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. The jury's expressions ranged from disgust to shock as they read through the messages. By the time court adjourned for the day, Maya felt a newfound strength. The tide was turning, and for the first time, she believed that justice might actually be on her side. The courtroom buzzed with the weight of everything unveiled so far. Maya sat quietly, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as the jury absorbed the revelations from the previous day. Daniel had been unmasked as a manipulator, and Vanessa's facade was cracking under the pressure. Still, Maya knew better than to celebrate too soon. The trial was far from over. The judge called the court to order, and Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Grayson, stood to address the jury. His tone was somber, almost imploring. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, what we've seen so far are selective pieces of evidence designed to paint my client in the worst possible light. But the truth, as you know, is rarely so one-sided. Today, we will demonstrate that Daniel Dalton is a devoted father who only seeks what's best for his child. Maya's stomach churned as Grayson called Daniel to the stand. Daniel walked to the witness stand with an air of confidence, but Maya could see the tension in his jaw. He swore in and sat down, his gaze briefly meeting hers before shifting away. Mr. Dalton, Grayson began, can you tell us why you initially sought full custody of your daughter? Daniel nodded, his expression carefully composed. I wanted to ensure Lily had a stable and consistent environment. Maya is a good mother, but she struggled after our divorce. She was overwhelmed, and I felt it was my duty to step in and provide that stability for Lily. Grayson leaned closer, his voice softening. And during that time, did you ever consider denying Maya access to Lily? Never, Daniel said emphatically. I've always believed Lily needs her mother. I just wanted to ensure her well-being. Elena's sharp intake of breath signaled her disbelief, but she remained silent, waiting for her turn. Grayson continued. What about the allegations against you, Mr. Dalton? The threatening messages, the manipulation of witnesses. What do you say to these claims? Daniel shook his head, his expression pained. It's heartbreaking. I would never do anything to hurt Maya or jeopardize Lily's future. Those messages weren't from me, and I can't speak to the actions of others. But I know who I am, and I know what I stand for. Grayson nodded. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. No further questions. Elena rose, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the stand. Her posture was confident, and her voice carried an edge of determination. Mr. Dalton, she began, you mentioned that you sought custody to provide stability for Lily. Can you clarify what you mean by stability? Daniel hesitated, sensing the trap. I mean a home where she feels secure, where her routine isn't disrupted. Elena tilted her head slightly. Would you say that stability includes honesty and trust between parents? Of course, Daniel replied, though his tone had a defensive edge. Interesting, Elena said, picking up a document from her table. Because according to these emails, you explicitly planned to fabricate stories about Ms. Kapoor to sway the court's decision. Would you consider that honest or trustworthy? Daniel's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to respond, but Elena cut him off. Let me rephrase. Is manipulating witnesses part of the stable environment you claim to provide for your daughter? Grayson stood. Objection, Your Honor. The defense is badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge said, though his expression suggested he wasn't impressed with Daniel either. Elena nodded, regrouping. Let's move on. Mr. Dalton, have you ever threatened Ms. Kapoor, either directly or indirectly? No, Daniel said firmly. Elena pulled out a printed copy of the threatening text Maya had received. Do you recognize this phone number? Daniel glanced at it, his face paling slightly. It's Vanessa's number, but I had no knowledge of her sending this. Elena raised an eyebrow. So, you're claiming that your fiancé acted independently, without your encouragement or approval? Yes, Daniel said, his voice tight. Elena leaned in. Would you be willing to provide your phone records to verify that? Daniel hesitated, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he said, if it helps clear my name, yes. Elena smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Good. We'll follow up on that. During the recess, Maya sat with Elena in a private meeting room, her nerves frayed. Do you think they'll find anything in his phone records? Elena tapped her pen against the table, her eyes thoughtful. If he's telling the truth, no. But if he's lying, and I suspect he is, then it could be a game changer. Maya sighed, running a hand through her hair. I just want this to be over. I'm so tired of fighting. Elena reached out, her voice softening. I know you are, but we're so close, Maya. They're starting to trip over their own lies. We just need to keep the pressure on. When court resumed, Elena introduced a new witness, Ava Morgan, a former employee of Daniel's who had worked closely with him during the custody battle. Ava was in her early 30s, with a nervous demeanor but a determined glint in her eyes. Ava, Elena began, can you tell the court about your role in Mr. Dalton's legal team during his custody case? Ava nodded. I was his administrative assistant. I handled scheduling, emails, and other tasks. And during that time, did you witness any behavior or communication from Mr. Dalton that concerned you? Ava hesitated, glancing at Daniel, who glared at her from across the room. Taking a deep breath, she said, yes. He frequently asked me to delete emails or messages that could make him look bad. He also instructed me to draft false statements about Maya. The courtroom erupted in whispers, and the judge banged his gavel. Order. Elena waited for silence before continuing. Did you keep any records of these instructions? Ava nodded, pulling out a USB drive. I backed up some of the emails before I left. I couldn't bring myself to destroy them. Elena took the drive, her expression triumphant. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this as evidence. Daniel's face was a mask of fury as the judge accepted the drive. Maya felt a surge of vindication. For the first time, the truth was fully out in the open. The courtroom was electric with tension as the trial entered its final stages. The USB drive Ava Morgan had submitted proved to be a treasure trove of damning evidence. Among the recovered files were emails detailing Daniel's plans to undermine Maya's character, instructing his team to fabricate reports and coerce witnesses. There was even a chain of messages between Daniel and Vanessa, discussing strategies to intimidate Maya into surrendering custody. The jury's expressions grew darker as Lena presented the evidence. Each email was read aloud, its contents a devastating blow to Daniel's credibility. For Maya, the revelations were both a relief and a renewed source of anger. Everything she had endured was a direct result of Daniel's calculated deception. During a recess, Maya sat with Lena in the courthouse hallway. Her nerves were frayed, but she felt a strange sense of calm underneath the storm. "They've exposed themselves completely," Lena said, flipping through her notes. "Daniel's credibility is in shreds. But we need to solidify our case with one last move." "What's that?" Maya asked. Lena leaned closer. Your testimony." Maya's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment, knowing the emotional toll it would take. But as she looked at Elena's steady gaze, she knew there was no other choice. The courtroom fell silent as Maya took the stand. The judge's gavel struck once, and all eyes turned to her. She swore in, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Lena approached, her tone softer than usual. "Maya, can you tell the court why you're fighting so hard for custody of your daughter?" Maya inhaled deeply. "Because Lily is my world. She's not just my daughter. She's my purpose. Every decision I make, every sacrifice I endure, is for her. I want her to grow up in a home filled with love, not manipulation or fear." Lena nodded. "You've heard the accusations against you, claims that you're unfit, that you neglect your child. What do you have to say to those claims?" Maya's voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. "They're lies. Every single one of them. I've devoted my life to being the best mother I can be. Lily's happiness and safety mean everything to me. Anyone who knows us can see that." Lena stepped closer. "And what about the threats you've received? How have they impacted you?" Maya swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "They've terrified me, but they've also shown me how far Daniel is willing to go to win. I'm not just fighting for Lily's custody. I'm fighting to protect her from a man who would use fear and lies to tear us apart." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Lena turned to the jury. "No further questions." Grayson hesitated as he stood for the cross-examination. His confidence had been shaken by the events of the past few days, but he pressed forward. "Maya," he began, "you claim to be a devoted mother, yet Daniel has presented witnesses who suggest otherwise. How do you explain that?" Maya met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "I explain it by saying the truth. Those witnesses were manipulated or coerced by Daniel. The evidence we've presented proves that." Grayson pressed on. "You've accused my client of sending threats and fabricating evidence. But isn't it possible that these are mere coincidences, or the actions of someone else entirely?" Maya leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, it's not possible. I've lived through this nightmare. I know where the threats came from, and I know who orchestrated them. Daniel can deny it all he wants, but the truth is plain for everyone to see." Grayson tried to regain control, but the damage was done. By the time he concluded his questioning, the jury's expressions were unreadable, but Maya sensed that her words had struck a chord. As the trial neared its conclusion, the judge called Daniel back to the stand. This time, he was not the confident man who had taken the stand earlier. His shoulders sagged, and his answers were short and defensive. Lena seized the opportunity to press him on the threats and the emails. "Mr. Dalton," she said, her voice sharp, "you've denied sending the threats to Ms. Kapoor, yet the phone records show multiple calls and messages between you and Vanessa around the time the threats were sent. Can you explain that? Daniel stammered. Vanessa. She acted on her own. I didn't tell her to send those messages. Elena's gaze was piercing. So you're claiming no responsibility, even though your fiancé was actively working to intimidate the mother of your child? Yes, Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. Elena nodded, her expression neutral. No further questions. By the end of the day, the courtroom was heavy with anticipation. Both sides had presented their final arguments, and the judge was preparing to instruct the jury. Maya sat with Elena, her heart pounding. The next day would determine everything. Her future, Lily's future, and whether justice would prevail. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment of the trial in her mind, her emotions swinging between hope and fear. As she lay in bed, she whispered a silent prayer. Please let them see the truth. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back into their seats. Maya sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly together, her breath shallow. The judge called the court to order, and the foreperson of the jury stood, holding a folded piece of paper. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, the foreperson replied. The judge nodded. Please read the verdict. Maya's heart pounded as she listened, every second stretching into eternity. In the matter of custody for Lily Kapoor, the foreperson began, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Maya Kapoor. The words didn't register immediately. It wasn't until Elena squeezed her hand that Maya realized what had been said. She gasped, tears streaming down her face as the weight of relief washed over her. The courtroom erupted. Elena quickly moved to shield Maya from Daniel's glare. He stood, his face twisted in fury. This is a mistake. She's unfit, he shouted. The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Dalton, sit down. This court has made its decision. Daniel's lawyer placed a hand on his arm, whispering something, but Daniel shrugged him off and stormed out of the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Maya, their cameras flashing, their voices blending into a chaotic blur. Elena guided her past them, a protective arm around her shoulder. How do you feel, Ms. Kapoor? One reporter shouted. Maya stopped, her voice trembling but firm. I feel grateful. Grateful to the court for seeing the truth, and grateful to everyone who stood by me. This fight wasn't just for me. It was for my daughter, for her future. And now we can finally move forward. That evening, Maya and Lily sat together in their tiny living room. The house was modest but filled with warmth. Lily was oblivious to the magnitude of what had happened, happily coloring at the coffee table. Maya watched her, a soft smile on her face. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. Elena's voice interrupted her thoughts. You did it, Maya. She was standing in the doorway, holding a bottle of sparkling cider. Maya laughed, wiping away a tear. We did it, Elena. I couldn't have done this without you. Elena sat down, pouring 2 glasses. You're stronger than you think. Don't ever forget that. They clinked glasses, the quiet toast marking the end of a long, painful chapter. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Daniel sat in his darkened office, staring at the stack of legal documents on his desk. Vanessa's absence was palpable. She had left him as soon as the verdict was announced, unwilling to share in his downfall. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. He wasn't finished, not by a long shot. But for now he was alone, his plans unraveling around him. As Maya tucked Lily into bed that night, her daughter looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. Mommy, are the bad people gone now? Maya stroked her hair, her voice steady and full of love. Yes, sweetheart, they're gone. You're safe now. Lily smiled and closed her eyes, drifting into a peaceful sleep. Maya stood by the window looking out at the night sky. The stars shone brightly, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always light to be found. Her battle was over, and she had won. Not just in court, but in reclaiming the life she and Lily deserved. For the first time in what felt like forever, Maya allowed herself to hope.